So when I was a young pastor, I was trained in seminary a certain way of leading worship, which included chanting. And when I got to my new parish, this was evidently a new thing for them. So I chanted the liturgy every Sunday. And on Christmas Day, after chanting the service, and I was greeting people at the door, shaking everyone's hand, and wishing them Merry Christmas, one fellow comes by and he says, I said, Merry Christmas. And he says, oh, I'm surprised you didn't sing it to me. They weren't used to chanting. And of course I wouldn't sing it to him, because there's something fundamentally different happening in the divine service than in normal conversation between people. When we're in the divine service, we're in the presence of the living God. We're in the presence of Christ our Lord, who is sacramentally present with us in the place. We call this a real presence as Lutherans. And the question that a pastor or a congregation always has to ask is, how do we act when we're in the presence of God? Are we going to act in the same way that we do, say, in just a normal conversation amongst friends, or are things going to be elevated in some way? The pattern we see in the scriptures is that things are indeed elevated, that reverence is sort of a key word in how we approach the holy things of God. So this pertains both in the Old Testament very clearly, but also in the New Testament. If we truly believe Christ is present with us, we're going to do things a little differently. So when it comes to the text that is spoken during the liturgy, the words that are said, how do we take our language and elevate it to a higher level? That's the real question. Well, traditionally, there are a couple of ways of elevating language. One is that you use a more formal way of speaking. So you're going to choose your words more carefully. They're going to be structured properly. You're not going to use slang and local idioms and those sorts of things. That's one way. The second way is through poetry. When we want to elevate language, we make language more poetic. The third way is through music. I often describe this to my students as being similar to when, in olden times, a young man would want to court a woman and would want to woo her. He would show up at night in front of her house, throw a pebble at the window and get her attention, and sing to her. Singing was a way to elevate his speech to the next level, to show her that he was really serious about her, that he really cared about her, that this language was important. So even though, we're not in a sort of a love relationship in that way with God, Jesus is not our boyfriend, we do use music to elevate our speech in his presence. And music is used to elevate his speech to us liturgically as well. So there's singing that takes place back and forth between pastor and congregation. Pastor standing in the place of Christ, and the congregation as Christ's bride. Historically, throughout the Old Testament, into the New Testament, into the whole era of the church, that music has been chant. The Psalms, for instance, were written to be chanted. The liturgy of the Old Testament involved the chanting of the Levitical priests. In the New Testament, this chanting is taken up and becomes part of the church's liturgy. And up until our very day, people have chanted the praises of God. Now, chant is simply speech set to musical tones. It's a little bit different than songs or hymns in that it's not metered. It doesn't have a rhythm. The rhythm of chant is the rhythm of speech. So when I chant, it just sounds like I'm singing regular, granted elevated poetic, but regular words, as opposed to a hymn, which is normally metrical, rhyming, etc. Now, the chant tones that we use have a long history. In our congregation on Sunday morning, we use a type of chant called Anglican chant, which obviously we've inherited from the Anglican Church, who developed this chant as a way to chant in English, which is the language we use. But Anglican chant tones are actually developed out of the older Gregorian chant tones. Gregorian chant is what you will hear in, say, a Latin Mass. And Gregorian chant has its roots way back in the synagogue of the Old Testament. Scholars have actually been able to trace the development of some of the Gregorian tones directly back to similar tones that were used in the synagogue at the time of Jesus, and some of which are still used in the synagogue today. And synagogue chant, of course, developed from the chant of the Old Testament tabernacle. So there is a long sort of train of development of chant music that comes down to our own time, that connects us back to the earliest church, to the synagogue, to the Old Testament temple and tabernacle, which I think is pretty cool. And this is a way that, as I said before, we are able to elevate speech in the divine service to show that we recognize that God is present. So the Lutheran Church is often known as the singing church. We get that because our people love to sing hymns. But the Lutheran Church is also a singing church because we uphold the church's tradition of chant in our prayers and in our worship together.